another episode of the Building Science Breakroom. My name is Enrico Bonilauri, co-founder and CEO of EmuPassive, and I have with me Parker Mersner, enrollment specialist at Emu. Good morning, Parker. How are you doing today?
Doing good, doing good. I'm excited for the questions that we have today.
Excellent. Thank you. And as we go live, we have questions that you have submitted in the past few days and few weeks. So we're going to go over a few of them that were particularly interesting this time. And you can submit your questions live as we go through. We're going to try to answer the ones that are more relevant today. And you can also submit more for the next Building Science Breakroom for next month. In fact, during this presentation, we're going to post a link again for that submitter form, so you have a chance to go do that for the July event. That being said, I'm going to start sharing, we have my screen shared, so we can get started right away. So today is the second edition of the Building Science Breakroom. This is where we open the floor and give the mic to you to post your questions about things that have been bothering you, maybe for a specific project, maybe for your climate zone, maybe for something that you have just learned in your training. And we can try to provide support and our insight in answering those questions. Or if something that is complicated, we can take some time and go back and do some more investigation. I myself took my advanced building science training with Passive House starting in 2010. And when I was first starting, there was a lot of questions. And the more training I took, the more questions came up. Now we're almost 20 years past and we still have a lot of questions, but at least we have managed to answer some of them. We also have a lot of experience with building and certifying high performance and passive house buildings in different climate zones internationally, in Europe, Australia, and the United States. So we can give a little bit of feedback to as far as some topics that may sound very daunting, but in reality, they may be not that important. So that is a little bit of the feedback that we can provide you besides the answer of specific questions. Emu was founded by myself and Mariana Pickering back in 2009 in Italy as an architecture practice. We moved to the United States about 10 years ago. This is our team. It's a great team. We mostly focus on high performance passive house training with focus on hands-on training. We are the main provider of passive house hands-on training throughout the United States. And we take our training on the road. We're going to talk more about that later a little bit. But in other words, this is our team, and I'm really proud to have put the team together because we really have great people on the team. Now, we can get started with the first question. This is something that George from New York City submitted, and it's about the blind side. And the blind side is basically when you are designing a building or building a building next to an existing building, probably next to a property lot. The question is, what are the best practices and strategies for blind side above grade conditions within a urban infill context? For example, building up against an existing structure where there's limited clearance and constructability becomes a concerning factor. This is pretty common, especially in high density infill locations like New York, where George is based. And this is something that it may cause you to have a different wall assembly than the typical wall assembly you have to the outside. So if your wall assembly to the exterior air in New York City may be a cinder block wall or a steel frame wall, load bearing wall, and then exterior insulation, and the air barrier may be the sheathing of that wall, you cannot do that in the condition that George is asking about, because that sheeting needs to be air sealed from the outside. And you cannot squeeze a tiny flat person between your new wall and the existing structure. So the constructability becomes an issue. Now, first off, my recommendation is to treat that as if you were doing a retrofit-ish. You know, if you have a brownstone building, even in New York or Brooklyn, you are insulated from the inside. You cannot touch your brick wall, you cannot do anything on the outside of that wall. So it's kind of similar condition. You're working yourself from the inside. And so your structure is exterior. You want to insulate from the inside. We recommend having a vapor open insulation for moisture management strategies. I strongly recommend not to have any spray foam, because spray foam really underperforms compared to the label value. It's not an air barrier, and it does not perform to the 6 or 7 R per inch that they declare. It's more like 3 R per inch, so stay away from that. And we recommend using vapor open. It can be blown cellulose, it can be mineral wool, it can be fiberglass, but that adjusts very well to the structure that you have. Again, you are working yourself backward, so you don't really have much of a chance to go around the structure of your building. And then the strategy to air seal this is the same as you would have, again, in a retrofit building or in a basement, in a conditioned basement. That is, you're going to use a smart vapor retarder membrane on the interior of that insulation, and that becomes your air barrier. This is a vapor open assembly. If there's any moisture coming in from the outside, it will evaporate to the inside. So it's an inward vapor drive. But this is a pretty solid strategy that you can use in the conditions that George is asking about. Clearly, you need to then articulate the transition details between this party wall, or this wall to the neighbor building, and what happens when you transition to an exterior wall. That is very important for both air sealing and thermal bridge mitigation, as well as if you have any intermediate floors, that structure of the floor will penetrate through your air barrier and through your insulation to go meet the exterior structure. So all of these details are very important for the success of the building overall, but this type of assembly is pretty straightforward, and this is what I would recommend in this condition. Clearly, if you're working with steel structure or cinder block, the implementation of thermal break strategies or air sealing strategies will vary. And George, if you're online now, please post your question. You can post pictures too, or drawings of the projects you work on, or if you watch this presentation being recorded, it's going to be published on YouTube. You can send us the images or drawings so we can elaborate this further. But this is the starting point. I would use an assembly where you're insulating inward from your structure and use a smart vapor retarder as your air barrier, just like you would do in a retrofit application. This is kind of in a nutshell, of what I would recommend, George. Again, please put your questions and comments in the chat. And if you have alternative strategies, I would love to read more about them. So put them in the chat as we go through. Then the second question that we got was from Marius from Philadelphia. And I found this to be big picture, very important to address. And it's about Dewpoint. And Dewpoint is one of those things that everybody knows in construction, and a lot of people still follow religiously. And it's like that old uncle from the 70s that's kind of inappropriate, and like, ooh, nice. Okay, we need to deal with this. But this is very important. And it's not to Marius' detriment. It's just something that is still impacting the construction industry to this day. The question Marius posted was, most walls and roof assemblies are designed around managing condensation using vapor control layers, permeability gradients, and drying potential. But what if an assembly is designed to avoid condensation entirely by using a fully non-permissive insulation layer that prevents moisture from entering and accumulating in the first place? In other words, what Marius is proposing is to have a completely vapor-closed assembly, or at least this is what I'm reading. Marius, if you're live now, please put your comments in the chat if I'm misreading what you're saying. And this idea of having something that is 100% bulletproof, vapor-closed, is part of the problem. And the problem stems from the Dewpoint assessment. For those of you who don't know, the Dewpoint calculation method was developed in the 1930s when Hitler was ruling Germany, literally. And it's based on calculations you can do by hand. In college, I used to do Dewpoint calculations myself by hand with a dumb calculator. And that is an extremely oversimplified way to address how moisture moves in assemblies. That is one side. And the other side here is that if you're building something bulletproof and it ends up not being bulletproof in the field, you have a very big problem, because now you have moisture angry at you in a way. So my feedback is there are two aspects to this question that are concerning, and this is not just about Marius, it's about the construction industry still hanging on and gripping on the Dewpoint method calculation. So in other words, it's as if Jim was like saying, oh, the 1930s were so nice. They were not so nice, and the Dewpoint method is not a good design tool. It's extremely obsolete. So the Dewpoint literally is something that was designed to help architects and designers to do calculations by hand. And it's extremely oversimplified, and the answer it gives us are oversimplistic, including the assumption that if my assembly is perfect, then I don't have any problems. If you have spent enough time on a job site, you know that no assembly is perfect. So you're creating a crystal structure here that as soon as it's nicked by a tiny little speck, it will crumble. In other words, if your assembly is completely vapor tight and completely impermeable to vapor, and then Joe, the builder, assembles it with a little bit 1% error, you get moisture getting into your assembly, and that moisture will sit there because it has nowhere else to go, and it will cause rot, mold, and condensation. So while this may work on paper, this is extremely risky in reality. And that's, in fact, this is how buildings were designed in the 1980s, because we had no better ways to design buildings. If you look at flat roof assembly design from the 90s to vapor barrier, with the hope that the roof assembly would be completely impermeable to vapor. And then as soon as a tiny little speck of moisture gets into that vapor-tight assembly, you get wood rot, and all of a sudden you have to demolish your roof because the moisture has nowhere else to go. So it's a very fragile strategy. It's not a really good strategy. So this is the other side. The problem with this, the first issue with this statement is the Dewpoint calculation is extremely oversimplified, so you cannot rely on that. And if you're trying to put this into the field, you face the fact that no assembly is perfect, and so you're exposing your structure to put moisture damage, very likely, because nobody's perfect. And so the reason why vapor open design is so popular now, it's because it's based on more advanced building science. It's based on building science like ASHRAE standard 160 and software modeling like Woofy or Delphin that account for many more phenomena that happen in real life in an assembly as opposed to just the Dewpoint method. To give an example, the Dewpoint method is like assessing health based exclusively on genetics. Does not account for workout, does not account for diet, does not account if you smoke or not, does not account for the accidents you may have on the road. But if your genetics are good, the Dewpoint method tells you are going to live to 100 years old. And that's what the Dewpoint method tells us for assemblies. It's extremely single-minded. So the reason why the market has been shifted to vapor open assemblies is there's a lot of parameters that come into play. Rain, wind, sun, occupancy, ventilation rates. The Dewpoint method does not account for any of this. The Dewpoint method does not know there's a sun, does not know there's rain, does not know there's occupants. So all of these do impact assemblies to a fair amount, and more advanced analysis like Woofy or Delphin allow you to factor this in for your specific climate zone. So this allows you to build resilience. So not if, when moisture gets into your assemblies, the assemblies have a way to dry out without your damage becoming permanent. This is extremely important because it expands on the goal of the design and construction of buildings that is past just checking a box of code and building buildings that are actually durable for 20, 30, 50 years in the future. So this is my feedback to the Dewpoint method question that Marius was bringing up. So I hope this makes sense. If you have more questions, put them in the chat. This is clearly a much longer conversation. This may be actually worth a whole webinar just to compare the Dewpoint method and dynamic modeling. So this is something that we may reflect on. Again, if you have more questions, please put them in the chat. And you can also think about this and submit your links in the chat for later. Parker, if you have a chance, please post the link in the chat for the submitter form for next time. Then the third question we have from Tom from San Francisco. We had George from New York, and now it's the time of Tom from San Francisco. And Tom was asking about Passive House design and construction strategies, modeling, and successful certification of modular multifamily housing, which is very important topic, both multifamily, modular, passive house design. And Tom is in California, so a little bit milder climate, so it's a little bit easier to get there. We have a whole article coming out about how bad Title 24 is. Many people think that Title 24, which is the energy code of California, is basically passive house, and that is a laughable statement because Title 24 is more like a bureaucracy, paperwork at work, and it does not really address health, comfort, and durability in buildings. But that's for another story. It's more to give context about where Tom is writing from. Now, this is a matter of leadership. My recommendation is to define these goals very early on and have your team really be aware of these. Because in order to build, Tom was not asking about cost effectiveness, but there's a lingering feeling that, at least for me, that Tom was interested in cost effectiveness and successful projects. And if you have your team aligned with these goals, that is the best way to get cost effectiveness in your project. Being cost effective and successful does not happen by chance. It's something you build. It's something you build through clarifying goals, training your team, and checking on those goals throughout the project. It's something you build. It's not something that magically happens. So the first step is to bring in these topics early on in your design concept stage, including the passive house consultant and the modular consultant. Because if you're trying to design a building to be passive house, yes, San Francisco's climate is easier to get to passive house than Madison, Wisconsin, no doubt. But to get cost effective, then it's something you want to bring that in at the early stages, similar to the modular design. If you're looking at panelized, if you're looking at a specific wall assembly, or if you're looking at volumetric modular, this is something you cannot just have your architect design whatever and then try to fit in the whole of the modular construction. It's not going to happen. It's not going to be cost effective if it does. So again, you want to clarify these goals with the team before the concept design even starts. And you want them probably learn about what passive house is and what modular construction is before they even put the pencil down to the paper, because it will change the way, it should change the way they design and they build. Second step is there's a lot to be done to optimize the design for both passive house and modular construction. The form factor, even in a mild climate like San Francisco, the form factor has a huge impact on cost, huge. The amount of glazing has a huge impact on cost too. Less so on multifamily buildings because it's less architects have less of a free rein approach than you get in commercial or custom homes, but still has, glazing costs a lot more per square foot than a wall. So this is something that you have to have this in mind from the concept design standpoint, and your architects have to be trained to do this, to learn this. Otherwise, if they're just painters and not really integrated architects, it becomes impossible to get to a cost-effective result. Something that I found working on multifamily projects, multifamily passive house projects in California, one big issue is that if your whole concept is to have direct entry, gallery, or exterior loaded apartment buildings, it becomes extremely difficult to meet the air tightness goals. And this is not only for passive house certification. The new Title 24, which remains a very incomplete document, let's call it like that, has introduced air tightness requirements only for multifamily buildings. And if you have exterior loaded dwelling units, it becomes extremely difficult to meet those parameters because each unit has to be air sealed as opposed to the building being one single airtight unit. It becomes, the smaller the airtight unit is, the harder it is to meet those airtightness requirements. So just from a concept standpoint, this is concept, but the decision we make at the concept stage has huge impact, not just on the passive house level, but also on the cost effectiveness and meeting those performance requirements, including the airtightness of the building. We recommend strongly to start this modeling at the very early design stage of the project. Concept design is probably an appropriate stage for multifamily projects because your budget for premium is probably less than you would have in a custom home. And so designing your building, not a full PHPP, but just a design PH. Design PH is the plugin that PHI Passive House Institute has developed for SketchUp. And so with very little information, with just some massing information, you can throw in some R values for assemblies, you can throw in some U values and solar heat gain coefficient for your glazing, and there you have an initial model that tells you how close or far you are from your performance goals. So that is something that can not just verify the achievement of the goal at the early stage, but also educate the team. This becomes a tool where you can compare variables and you can compare options so that the team can make more informed decisions moving forward. So this is, we strongly recommend using this stage and educating architects to do this. Passive House Network does a great job with the design PH training, and that is something that is very, very key in buildings becoming successful, especially if this is the first time you do it. The second or third time around, you may know already what kind of R values to look for. Your architects may already be familiar on what to avoid, at least, to get to this level of performance. This is something that we recommend, especially for teams that are facing the passive house and modular construction for the first time. Now, if you want to learn more, also if you want to submit your questions for the next session, this is the QR code that takes you to the submitter form. We do these Building Science Breakroom events every first Wednesday of the month in the morning. So you can submit your questions here, and then we're going to review them. And if you are chosen, we're going to answer them live on LinkedIn. Now, please add your questions to the live chat right now so we can go over them together and answer them once I'm done with this presentation. So next is something to consider is we offer training in the form of online training, in-person and hybrid boot camps throughout the country, and continuing education every other weeks. Pretty much we do live webinars that are free online. So that something to consider is use the QR code to look for the events that are coming up. We have a lot of in-depth presentations about retrofits, warm climates, cold climates, humid climates, commercial buildings, and then more building science in-depth conversation. So this is something that we can continue the conversation. And you can see if these topics are interesting for you for your career. And if so, then you can come and do your hands-on training at the Passive House Bootcamp or your online training with us. This is the bootcamp training. A little bit of information here. We have dates coming up in Denver, Los Angeles. We're going to be in the Bay Area, and then back to the East Coast in the spring next year. This is a great way to further your careers as well as network with local professionals. We do a lot of networking lunches, networking social events. In combination with these events, we're really trying to help build local communities in combination with these local Passive House training events. That being said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we can go over questions that you may have posted in the chat.
Awesome. No questions in the chat at the moment, but we can hang out and see if anybody has anything to offer.
Cool. Yeah, this is a great time to also share, and we have a lot of people that come and just join, listen in, and want to be a fly on the wall just to see what's up and what other people are doing in other climate zones, and if they're using specific products or if they are meeting specific performance goals. Mm-hmm. So this is a good time to just brainstorm and post your questions in the chat.
Yeah, I found it really interesting, especially the multifamily question. I would love to see kind of more multifamily growth, especially kind of in the California region I was researching. And I don't think there's any large. There's a couple like small multifamily Passive House certified buildings right now, but nothing quite on the scale of some of the larger ones on the East Coast.
Yeah. I think California has, on one side, has the climate that is pretty mild, so there's a perception that the need is less stringent or less pressing than other climate zones. If you are in Minneapolis, you do know that you need some beefy jacket in the form of a building. Yeah. California, less so, although something that is often misunderstood or overlooked is the impact on the indoor air quality and on health of people. In fact, tomorrow I'm giving a free presentation about Passive House as an indoor air quality strategy. Mm-hmm. So if you go to immupassive.com and look for events, you will find the link to register for that. And I brought that up because in Los Angeles, it is one of the mildest climates in the country, and the return on investment on energy savings for Passive House is negligible. You have a dramatic impact on how better life is inside an airtight building that is supplied with filtered continuous ventilation, which is Passive House. Title 24 has some stringent filtration requirements in that it requires a MERV 13 filter, same as the International Passive House standard. Mm-hmm. Title 24 is actually more stringent than FUSE. FUSE only requires a MERV 8 filter on the intake. And so you may think that Title 24 is stringent on the filter, so we're good. We are not, because Title 24 has basically no requirements for the building to be airtight. It's they have one page for the airtightness requirements that is air seal everything, period. Mm-hmm. There's no requirements about any metrics to be met. In other words, there's no verification. The exception is for multifamily building, they introduced a air tightness requirement, but single-family home buildings and commercial buildings, they still allow visual inspection, which is a loophole to say, yeah, you have an air barrier. Mm-hmm. There's holes, but there is an air barrier. So that is pretty disappointing for Title 24.
Hey, we did get one question in the chat that I want to bring up from Natalia. Thank you, Natalia. And it says, overheating risk in Passive House buildings is becoming a concern. Any update on research and solutions being worked out by PHI lately?
Thank you, Natalia, and good to see you, by the way. Overheating in Passive House building has been a concern for a long time. because if a building is poorly designed, it may be subject to overheating. And to me, that is a matter of we, the passive experts, being honest and transparent with the owners of the building and identify priorities, concern, and likely ways they're going to use the building. In other words, you can certify a passive house building without a cooling system. I would never do that, period, because that is similar to what I was describing about the Dewpoint method, is about differentiating between what is on paper versus what we, the professionals, believe is going to be the most accurate way the building is going to perform. And so there are ways in PHPP to estimate the number of hours that exceed the threshold of 77 degrees or 25 degrees Celsius. And a lot of people in the United States will not find that threshold to be acceptable. So that is already beyond the acceptability range. Our experience, we are almost done with doing consulting. We, EMU, have about 10 plus years of passive house consulting behind us. We always included active cooling, even in buildings at 10,000 feet of elevation, because that allows a more resilient way to address expectation from users. So the issue with overheating, it's possible, and I think it is, if you're trying to design a passive house building that does not have active cooling, that is very risky from a user expectation standpoint, if that makes sense. And Natalia, please follow up on with another question if this doesn't answer what you said. But that has been our experience and our feedback over the last 10 years of doing project. We did a project even in Alaska. We included active cooling, just for that expectation.
Awesome, thank you. And we've got a question here from Nathan. Nathan Trick said, I think I missed the last foundation detailing session. I'd like to see this again. I have a duplex on a crawl space with a center foundation at the party wall. Mm-hmm. Looking for the best way to mitigate that thermal bridge coming up from the ground.
That's a great question. And for context, Nate is in climate zone 5B. He's a fellow Coloradan. So that the answer to the question will vary depending on where we are in the country. And in the Denver climate zone, we most likely want to have the crawl space condition, meaning we may not supply it with active cooling or heating, but we want that to be enclosed in the passive house building envelope. In other words, the floor of the crawl space is going to be insulated, and the floor between the unit and the crawl space is not going to be insulated. And the air bed is going to be the vapor bed at the crawl space floor, and so the boundary of the conditioner envelope is going to be the floor of the crawl space. Now, if you have your nice insulation going through, and all of a sudden you have a stem wall or piers of concrete piercing through that, it's going to be a thermal bridge, and it does impact the performance of the building. In the research we've done, it's a study that we published a couple of years ago about 50 buildings modeled around the country, looking at different building standards, blah, blah. We found heat losses through the ground to the outside air to be the third greatest cause of losses in single-family home buildings overall. First one being windows and exterior doors, excluding air leaks. So just conductive heat losses to windows and exterior doors. And the second one being conductive heat losses through the exterior walls. And the third one being the heat losses through the ground. And heat losses through air leakage was only number 4. So heat losses through the ground are very important. Now, in this case, in Nate's case, we're talking about a thermal bridge that is in the middle of the building. So maybe a follow-up question for Nate is this a continuous foundation, or is this piers? Because, I mean, if it is the party wall, it's likely going to be a continuous foundation, but I don't want to assume that. If it is a continuous foundation, you may wrap your insulation up the walls and then some on top of the foundation wall, or depending on where your footer is relative to the foundation floor, to the crawl space floor, it may be easier to just have just 2 inches of high density EPS or XPS under the footer and have that be a warm foundation. Then the issue becomes, how do we connect that warm foundation to the perimeter foundation? If your perimeter foundation is on the outside of the insulation, then your perimeter foundation is cold, and you need to thermally separate the warm foundation from the perimeter foundation. You can do that by, again, a couple of inches of foam. The rebars can go through. The rebars, if your structural engineer is concerned about the rebars being corroded over time, you can use fiberglass rebars, but there's a little bit of more information that we would need in order to answer the question properly.
Awesome. So it looks like it is continuous. We got an answer there. So cool. And we do have another question here from Valentine. And yeah, I'll go ahead and answer these. And if people have more questions for next week, there is a link kind of at the top of the chat. The very first comment there by me has the link for next week's questions. But let's see here. So Valentine says, how to deal with an unheated front porch that is connected to passive house envelope. An example, the porch is outside the thermal envelope. In a cold climate. Are there any tips to watch out for? Our plan is to attach it via the siding, but the thermal envelope will not be interrupted and no insulation or vapor barrier. There will be an AWB on the outside.
Cool. So thank you, Valentin. You're in a cold climate, and the porch consists of 2 main parts mostly. You have the above grade, which is likely wood. Please correct me if I'm wrong, and you can post your comments in the chat. And the foundation of the porch, that's likely going to be concrete. So there's 2 parts of this, and the concrete conducts heat 100 times more. No, maybe not 100 times, but maybe 20, 30 times more than wood. So in terms of heat losses, we have very big binocular on the foundation because there's going to be a lot more heat losses at the foundation. For the framing, 2 main things. One is, I will double read your question to see if you have any exterior insulation or if it is a double wall type of structure, and then where your air water barrier is, which sounds like it's going to be on the outside of your sheeting. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Now, for the foundations, to start off with, you have the foundation of your porch attached to the foundation of the house. If your house foundation strategy is to insulate that from the inside with a conditioned crawl space, and if you have no insulation on the outside of your foundation, you're good. Nothing else.
Let me just chime in. Valentine said it's on posts with no foundation under it. Can you see this comment?
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So, okay, cool. Okay, that's easier. Okay. The posts are still going to sit on something, and if it is just on concrete piers, they're good. They don't touch the house, and we're good.
Yeah.
And then if you have a double wall, dude, you're easy. So for a double wall construction, however, easy, but to a certain point. If you have a double wall construction in a cold climate, you cannot use your exterior WLB as your air barrier. you need to have a smart vapor retarder on the interior of the innermost wall to be your warm air barrier. So the air barrier of your wall needs to be shifted from the outside of the sheeting to the inside of the wall. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of condensation issues inside your wall assembly. So I'm glad we caught this, because this is really about how the wall is designed, not about how the porch is attached. So with that, you can attach your porch easily, because it's not impacting the air barrier. If you had a 2x6 wall, load bearing, the sheeting was your air barrier, and you had extreme insulation, you can also do that, but you would have to have some strategy on how to air seal any penetrations of the porch beams coming through and sitting on the wall studs. But in your case, your porch doesn't seem to be the problem. I strongly recommend having a smart vapor retarder on the interior face of your interior walls, in the double stud wall, as your air barrier, because in a cold climate, you cannot have your air barrier being on the outside. That you would have more than condensation issues throughout your wall assemblies.
Awesome. And yeah, if you guys have any further questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. And but this is great so far. So
yeah, good topics, good question. We have a few more minutes, so please post your questions while you have them. And Parker, did you have a chance to post the link for the form for next month?
Yep, the form for the next month is there in the chat. Also, training options. And I'll also share right now, if anybody wants to join for upcoming events like this, I'll post that right now as well.
Awesome. Well, this has been a lot of fun. And Nathan is asking, would that also be true in Colorado? If you're asking about the double stud wall with the interior air barrier, absolutely yes. That applies to climate zone 4 and higher. So do not do a double stud wall with an exterior air barrier. You're going to have more than condensation problems. You need to have the air barrier on the inside, on the warm side of the insulation, which in climate zone 4 and higher, and definitely Colorado, that's on the inside.
Awesome. And I think you can see Valentin expanded a little bit more on the project.
Intello will be on the inside. I was going back and forth about keeping the unheated front porch with a double wall, went against that. Okay, yeah. So sounds like you have it. The Intello will be, you need to air seal your Intello. The Intello is a smart vapor retarder membrane, which itself is not airtight until you air seal that. But that can be your interior air barrier I was referring to. If your porch is outside of the building envelope, you don't need to do anything fancy. You can do a regular construction and save some cost there. Awesome. Well, I'm glad we had some great questions coming in. We had some great questions coming in from the forum. So if you're watching this later, you will find the link in the chat where you can post the questions for the next session, and we will be posting this on YouTube next. So follow us on YouTube too if you have a chance. Thank you for that. I'm Enrico Bonilaudi with Passive and Parker Mosner, and see you next time. Bye.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.